So I am joined on the phone with George A. Pappy Jr. Welcome to the show, George.
Hi, nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you. I already gave an introduction to your documentary called The Green Girl. What inspired you to do this, or to get this documentary rolling?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I was sitting around one night back in the summer of 2011 rewatching The Cage, the original rejected pilot for Star Trek, the original Star Trek. And now that I have an iPhone, I tend to grab it whenever I'm watching shows like this, and I'll get on my mobile internet movie database application, and I'll look the old actors up sometimes. And, you know, I do that all the time with Star Trek and shows like that. And usually what you see with a guest star on Star Trek is, you know, they maybe had a dozen, 24 credits, mostly in the 60s, and then they kind of stopped acting or whatever. And I looked Susan Oliver up, and I was just about floored when I saw she had about 128 credits to her name. And I'm a movie guy, and I was shocked that I didn't know that. The only other thing I knew about her was that she'd been in a Twilight Zone with Roddy McDowall in 1960. So that got me curious.
Wow, that's ironic that you say that, because I had the exact same experience. I did a guest appearance on a different podcast where we actually talked about The Cage, and again, like I picked up my cell phone to look up Susan Oliver just to see whatever happened to her, and then I was shocked to find out that she died of cancer back in 1990, and ironically I do remember seeing her on that episode of The Twilight Zone not too long ago.
Yeah, but you look at all the other things she was in. I mean, as I come to say kind of jokingly, but not really, you can't swing a dead cat through 60s TV without hitting her constantly. I mean, she was on shows like Wagon Train 4 times, Route 66 3 times, The Invaders twice. It's just crazy how many times she was on shows. Gomer Pyle, Andy Griffith, and somehow it never registered with me. I managed to miss all of this. So it's like she was there, and I think if you're old enough to have watched those shows first one, you do remember, but a lot of us, I'm only 47, so it's really only those things like Twilight Zone or Star Trek that are rerun a lot, and especially I have a sci-fi kind of a bias, that I've seen, at least up to that point. I've seen a lot of her stuff now in the last year or so.
Yeah, and I was because I'm a huge fan of MASH, and to find out that she directed 2 episodes of MASH and one of Trapper John MD, that was pretty cool too. Yeah,
that kind of grabbed my attention shortly after I noticed the 126 credits. Trust me, that's shocking for that era. There were hardly any women being allowed to direct anything 30 years ago. She directed the MASH in 82 and the Trapper John in 83. And I think she was only one of 5 women to direct the MASH, and she was one of only 2 women to direct the Trapper John. And those were major shows that ran a lot of years. That was almost exclusively a closed men's world back then. So, and then it didn't take long for me to figure out she was one of the first members of the AFI Women Directing Workshop for Women when they first founded that back in the 1970s, which is still around today. It's kind of held in pretty high regard these days.
Yeah, that is so true. So for your documentary, The Green Girl, where did you get started, like as far as like getting the ball rolling on this project?
Well, I started by I discovered she'd written an autobiography in 1983 at a Los Angeles library here had a copy, so I read it, and it was just fascinating, and it made me realize what an amazing life she lived. I mean, she was also a very accomplished pilot, flying primarily in the 60s and the first half of the 70s, and she just knew everyone, and so I started. I just thought to myself, someone ought to document this woman's life. Especially, it really touched my heart in the introduction to the book. She says, you know, I wrote this partly because I had a sense of, hey, world, I was here. I did something. I mattered. I just want to, you know, that's my statement to the world. And then to realize how forgotten she's been. You know, no one really knows who she is anymore. If you happen to know Star Trek, you may know her from the Green Girl role, and that's it.
Yeah.
I just felt a sense of responsibility to do something. And I started to realize, too, I mean, if she were alive, she'd be 80 right now, which is not out of the question. A lot of the people she was contemporaneous with are still with us, and I realized I ought to just get a camera and start interviewing people. And I didn't know at the time if I was going to do a documentary or a book, but I wanted to get those first-hand stories while people are still around.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So who have you interviewed so far for the documentary?
Oh, well, in the last year, I've managed to get Lee Merriweather, who any of your Star Trek fans will know as Lyra from that one episode of, I think, third season Star Trek. She's also with Catwoman in the Batman movie and many other things. David Hedison, who was on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and also was the original scientist in The Fly. Peter Mark Richmond, who's been in just about everything, everywhere. Not surprisingly, he and Susan appeared together 4 different times. Rosie Greer, of all people. I don't know if you guys up in Canada know him. He was a very famous American football player. And then also one of the 2 guys that wrestled Bobby Kennedy's assassin to the ground. Really interesting guy. And it's
okay.
It happens to be someone that Susan knew. They were in a movie together and then became good friends for a while. A lot of other people that maybe the names you wouldn't recognize, but Clay Lacy, who he's known in Hollywood as, he's the guy that developed the aerial photography gear. He's a pilot and developed special cameras that shot movies like Top Gun from a plane's perspective. And Susan used to fly Learjets with him back around 1970, give or take.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah. So, and Larry Nemecek, who's kind of one of the foremost Star Trek experts. I talked to him. Celeste Yarnall, who was she played a yeoman on an episode. What was that episode called? The Apple.
Okay.
Second season. Yeah. And she didn't know Susan, but she was very aware of her. She said all the young actresses of that era, Susan was kind of like you'd hope to be as successful as Susan was. So I've really cast a wide net. Even other people she's flown with, a lot of her family, the family that's still alive and knew her. Most of them have been very gracious and gotten in front of my camera, so it's been quite a journey.
No, that's awesome, and like you said, like a lot of people may not know her story, so it's awesome that someone like you would put this together. Like I know, like I'll definitely be watching this, and I think a lot of people who not necessarily were Star Trek fans will definitely want to check this out because it's like you said, she's lived quite the life, and she not only was she did so many acting jobs and was on so many TV series and movies, but yeah, just her aviation achievements is incredible.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. She took this gutsy solo flight across the North Atlantic in 1967. Actually, the jumping off point to get over the water was Goose Bay, Canada. She came up from LaGuardia in New York and flew that thing alone, in a single-engine plane. Against the advice of some people. I mean, she really probably wasn't quite ready for it, but kind of, she determined she was going to do it. There was a timeline, and she just went. Pretty amazing lady, and then this whole thing with directing. That was a rare thing at that time. I'm saddened by the fact that the last 7 years of her life, she seems to have spent trying to get someone to let her direct again, and they just wouldn't. For how amazing her life was in the 60s and let's say the first half of the 70s, I think it was rather disappointing how things turned out, towards the end of her life. And that's another reason I just feel bad for the lady, that to get forgotten after having been such a big deal and done so many amazing things.
Yep.
Other than just be another pretty face. She really was a pretty amazing woman. Everyone I've talked to just had a very high opinion of her. So I thought it was the least I could do. I'd love it if people could rediscover or discover this story for the first time.
No, that's awesome. For your documentary, like, is it going to be released on DVD?
Well, my suspicion is that definitely it'll be DVD and streaming.
Okay.
I have a funny feeling. I haven't really worked out any release yet. I'm just shooting. I doubt very much that you'd ever see it in theaters, although I think we may have a shot at a festival run. I'll certainly put it out there on the festival circuit. And I think we may also have a shot on one of the cable channels, especially the women's interest kind of niche, like Oprah's channel or Lifetime, some of those, or even Arts and Entertainment or Bravo. I'll definitely try to get it out that way too. But yeah, definitely, if all else fails, you'll definitely be able to get a DVD and streaming, video on demand kind of arrangement.
No, that's awesome, and it would definitely be an awesome fit for the biography channel. Because for me, I love watching biographies, especially about people of interest to me, and Susan Oliver definitely was. But yeah, so like she died in 1990 of lung cancer. Was she a big smoker back in the day, or?
She was on and off. Yeah. It was a series of cancers she had. It metastasized into lung cancer, and that ended up killing her. And the sad part about that is there is some evidence I've been slowly uncovering that she may have been able to survive that. We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is she really didn't try hard at all to fight it. And I get the sense she kind of had given up.
Yeah.
And people have told me that too. Again, because of this really years of disappointment and not having much success being able to direct, where she'd had such phenomenal success 20, 30 years earlier as an actress. And it just was not being taken seriously in an almost exclusively male-dominated field at that time.
Yeah.
And I really wish she'd hung in there a little longer, because not that it's anything like Equitable now, but starting in the 90s, it really got a lot better for women. That's when it somewhat opened up for women to be able to direct, and it just keeps getting better. We still have a long way to go, but she was a real pioneer 30 years ago. Yeah,
definitely ahead of her time. And do you know, did she ever attend Star Trek conventions or anything like that?
Well, it's funny. No, Larry Nemechek brought that up to me. We met and talked at Walter Koenig's weekend celebration for his Hollywood star back in September, and that's when I got the idea of interviewing Larry. And I know this, that I have one photo of Susan from the 1980s that what appears to be, sitting at a table signing autographs. So she may have made it once, but Larry pointed out that the real kind of the modern Star Trek convention, the highly organized, hugely attended type conventions we have now, didn't really take off till the 90s.
Yeah.
Kind of in the time frame after Next Generation really got a foothold and a huge following. And Susan missed out on all that. And he also astutely pointed out that unfortunately she also missed out on the opportunities the later shows and movies gave to some of the old actors to come and do walk-ons and cameos, and she didn't get that opportunity. And the really sad part, by the way, if I can digress on this, is
sure.
A last interview I saw with her from 1988, she was talking about how she had tried to get Paramount to let her direct The Next Generation. And they told her something to the effect of she lacked the necessary action and sex background to do it, which sounds very much like a kind of a coded message of, girls don't direct Star Trek. I did the research, and other than Gates McFadden directing one of the final episodes in the last season, there was only one other woman in that entire series that got to direct that Next Generation. And you would think that if they really wanted to help her out, they could have brought her on the set and gotten her up to speed, and at some point let her direct one. But they said no. That's kind of sad.
It is, and to think that happened in the late 80s, that's kind of astonishing. But if it had been now, she definitely would be directing by today's standards.
Oh, sure. So, but and that's part of the story that I think is worth telling too. And I got real lucky there. I'm going to be interviewing early next year Nancy Malone. If you know your Twilight Zone, you might know of her. She's an attractive redheaded actress back in the 50s, 60s, same era as Susan. She did the Twilight Zone where she and her husband wake up from a hangover in a strange town. They don't know how they got there. It turns out the whole town is a dollhouse town, and they finally figure out they've been kidnapped by a giant alien and given to his daughter as toys.
Okay.
That's Nancy Malone. And Nancy, it turns out, also was in the AFI Women Directors Program with Susan. And Nancy turned out to be the first VP of television production at Fox, I believe it was, back in the mid-'70s. and very astutely parlayed that into a successful directing career starting in the 80s, and she's directed dozens of TV shows. And so and she told me she's probably one of the last people to see Susan alive. She was at her bedside when Susan was about to die at the motion picture home here in Woodland Hills. So I really can't wait to hear what she has to say about what things were like for women 30 years ago in this town.
Yeah. Your documentary, it's slated for 2013 release?
Yeah, I'm hoping to have it out in the fall. I want to try and stop shooting interviews by middle of this coming year, so June, say, or May, and then we're going to hit it hard with the post-production over the summer, and hopefully have at least the rough cut ready by August, because I want to start submitting to Sundance and some of the other festivals.
Yeah.
And we should have it completed by the fall, so it should be ready for viewing by the fall of 2013.
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking very forward to watching that. So where can people find you on the internet if they want to inquire more about your documentary?
Well, so far, we've got our Facebook page, which if you just go to Facebook and type The Green Girl, you'll get us, and we always love to get new followers. We also have a Twitter feed, which is, I believe, how you and I hooked up, which is a Green Girl Movie. And on top of that, we're listed on the Internet Movie Database, imdb.com, if you want to look us up, which is a good way to see who, every time I interview someone new, I add them to the list. So everyone that we've interviewed is listed there. That's imdb.com, and just look up The Green Girl. So those are the ways to follow us right now, and I will be posting. And let me just add that early next year, probably January, we're going to launch a Kickstarter campaign, and I'll be mentioning it on Twitter and Facebook. We need to raise some money to hire a really good editor. A picture like this is made or broken in the editing room, and we also need some really good legal representation, because when you got someone who's been in this much stuff, you got a lot of photographs and a lot of footage, and we need expert legal advice on how to make maximum use of the fair use clause, so we don't end up having to pay $250,000 to the studios.
Well, George, when you get that Kickstarter campaign lined up, you let me know, and we'll have you back on, and we'll definitely promote that, because I have a lot of faith in this movie. Like, I'm looking very forward to it, and I definitely want to see it get off the ground and made in the way that you want it made, like you said, with all the footage and all the legal issues worked out, so you don't have to sacrifice your vision for not legal reasons, right?
Right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I'll tell you this: if anyone out there that's considering doing a creative project, that Kickstarter is a pretty amazing medium. Partly because it's a social network as well, and I've been able to reach out to so many other documentary filmmakers and ask them questions about how they do this kind of stuff. And it seemed very daunting at first, and I was thinking the legal issues were going to be insurmountable. It turned out not necessarily so at all. So that's worth checking out if you've never checked out Kickstarter.
Okay, that's awesome. But yeah, definitely when you have that set up, let me know, and we'll have you back on, and I will definitely be donating, because the Green Girl movie, I'm looking forward to it, and I definitely want to see it made. I want to see your vision realized for sure.
Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate this.
Well, I really appreciate having you on the show, and like I said, for doing this documentary, I'm looking forward to it.
Cool, man. I'm glad we connected.
Awesome. Yeah. That's the wonders of Twitter. It's like you said, that's how we met, and that's how we got everything lined up. So, yay, social media.
Yay.
Well, thanks again, George, and we will talk to you again in the future.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that, again, was George A. Pappy Jr. Like I said, he is putting together a documentary called The Green Girl, and it's about Susan Oliver, so I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, it was like I said, like when I did my episode for Nerd Lunch, where we talked about Star Trek and The Cage. that's when I actually looked up Susan Oliver and learned more about her. And yeah, it's really tragic that she was taken, by cancer, and she was such an accomplished person. To lose her, I think she was 58 when she passed away. Very sad. And like just touching on some of her aviation stuff, in 1967, piloting her own Aero Commander 200, Oliver became the fourth woman to fly a single-engine aircraft solo across the Atlantic Ocean, and second to do so from New York City. She wanted to fly to Moscow, but she had to land in Denmark after the Soviet Union denied her entry into their airspace. I mean, man, right there, that's amazing. And this is 1967. Like, this was when Star Trek was going. Like, this was when it was on the airwaves, and to have her do this, absolutely amazing. And yes, like, she was a stunningly beautiful woman, and yeah, her accomplishments are absolutely incredible. And to have her be forgotten almost is really quite sad. So that's why, like, this documentary, I'm really looking forward to it, and I really believe in it a lot. And aside from George touched on some of her guest appearances. She also did guest appearances on Magnum P.I., Murder, She Wrote, The Fugitive, The Anna Griffith Show, and yeah, like I said, she was on perhaps one of the definitely, I'd say, the top 10 of my favorite all-time original series Twilight Zone episodes. She was on the one with Roddy McDowall where he crash lands on Mars and he ends up being in a Martian zoo, and she plays one of the Martians. Yeah, so again, it was awesome to have George on the podcast, and we'll have him again